A lot of us are still don't understand pleasure and don't understand our bodies and don't know what we want. And I have the honor of being able to explore some of those aspects of our lives with people that are paying to explore their own sexuality with me. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say for now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. And V, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us. V, can you, I just want to make sure I don't mess up your last name. Can you confirm it for me?
Yeah, Lozano.
Lozano. Okay. So you facilitated a variety of workshops, not dissimilar to one on topics including consent, self-love, kink, and the importance of including ability, status in sexual health and education and information. Tell us where your interest in these topics comes from and anything else we should know about your experience or expertise.
Sure, thank you. So quick description about me. I'm wearing a beige sweater, cat eye, I think they're like reddish brown, glasses. My hair is pretty straight, kind of a little bit of wavy brown. I'm Latinx, I'm kind of caramel looking, and I have a light pinkish lipstick, but I don't know if you can see it on camera. And my background is pretty colorful. You can see a lot of my homage to Frida Kahlo in the background. And yeah, so a little bit more about me. So very similar to Bianca, I started as a peer educator when I was like 17, and now I'm in my 30s. And it's been a passion of mine since my younger days because I have a disability. I was born with cerebral palsy, and I also have a compromised immune system. So, as a lot of people might be able to have the similar experience of going to school, or just being in community with their friends or family and getting asexualized without necessarily given more information about their bodies or what sexual orientation is or what pleasure is. And so I kind of spearheaded my own career in terms of, educating myself while I was educating others. And now I'm lucky enough to call myself a therapist. And I'm a medical case manager as well. So I do a little bit of everything, and do a lot of advocacy around trauma and disability, and just sexual health. That's pretty much my my jam. So I'm happy to be here. And my pronouns are she, her, hers, and they, them.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so Maggie is going to continue on with our next question.
Hi all, my name is Maggie. She and they pronouns both work for me. I am a prevention educator with Resilience, Rape Crisis Center in Chicago, and also a member of the Illinois Imagines Committee, looking at that intersection of disability and sexual violence. And this is a topic that's super near and dear to me in that pretty much all of my primary caregivers as a kid had multiple disabilities. And so it's a community that I've been running adjacent to my whole life. And sexual health education is just like my bread and butter. So thanks for letting me ask you all some questions. And a quick description of me, I have very long, thanks pandemic, very long red hair, and I'm wearing gold and clear sort of cat eye glasses, and I have on bright red lipstick. I am also very fair complected, white, and I'm wearing a white shirt against a green background. So on to the main event. Bianca, I'm going to look to you first. While we have Tara to thank for sort of the idea behind the discussion, a lot of our considerations and especially the questions that we'll be asking tonight come directly from your experience as a sexual health educator, and especially your work that you mentioned on Crip Camp, and sort of you were kind enough to share with us the kinds of questions folks were asking you during those trainings. So I want to start us off by asking, what have you seen as being a big absence in terms of education around sexuality and health, specifically for audiences with disabilities?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges has been how we as disabled people are continuously still having to survive a medical model of disability. And that medicalization pathologizes or doesn't humanize us and our sexual expression and choices that we have. And so what that usually looks like is nobody talks to us about sexually transmitted infections, nobody talks to us about barrier methods, the questions that we have when it comes to seeing a provider around our sexual health. People make assumptions about us still. And so we're not really asked a really comprehensive assessment of, well, what do you do with your body when you share it with another person or people? Or how many partners have you had? Or what are some of your concerns that you have that you want to talk to me about today? That is already not present. And I think another thing that we're experiencing is figuring out a way that disabled people can lead the conversation of sexual attraction and orientation, specifically around not only challenging the assumption that we are asexual and therefore don't have certain types of desires or interests, while also acknowledging and respecting asexual community members who do have this particular experience. And so, you know, acknowledging the power that comes with weaponizing a sexual orientation when it's forcibly applied to us, but then also the power that we have as disabled people who may not identify as asexual, who ace people might identify us as allosexual, and how we can be in solidarity with challenging those kinds of oppression. I think we're switching ASL interpreters? No. Okay, and also, oh, we are. So I'm just gonna pause for our ASL interpreters. Great. And so what that has looked like is us getting comfortable talking about how it's harmed us, while also talking about how we can possibly cause harm if we don't acknowledge how ace people are also being harmed. And that's a term that asexual people self-identify with sometimes, is ace. I've also seen a lot of people who are like, that's great, Bianca, that you're talking to me about sex, but I need to find people to have sex with first. And I'm disabled and nobody wants to fuck me. What do I do? You know, like, and also, girl, that's great, but like, I'm in a pandemic. How do I masturbate when my care attendant is always with me? Like, how do I get some privacy, right? And so it's not even about all the time what we're doing with our bodies as much as it is about what does privacy look like for disabled people, and not so much about body autonomy as much as it is about self-determination and acknowledging that I do want to masturbate, but it doesn't always feel comfortable for me to have to tell my attendant, hey, can you position me this way? And then leave the room for 30 minutes, you know, or, you know, get me this other item and can you help me with it? Or, you know, how to have these conversations about sexual expression. And then another layer to that would be, what happens when someone in our community has to be institutionalized, where they don't have the body autonomy, and where being sexualized or being sexual at all has become a breaking the rules, and therefore a possible expelment or expulsion, I don't know the right word, and therefore being houseless because you wish to have a sexual life. And so this also brings up opportunities for us as disability activists and educators to train nursing home, you know, attendants, to train medical providers and people who house us on how to create rules that honor our body autonomy and our sexual expression, and also address the discomfort that non-disabled people have who are tending to us, which is not our problem. And we shouldn't have to deal with it when seeking care. So it's been a lot of systemic stuff. It's been a lot of general needs, but also some really basic things about where do all the Crips go to fuck each other? Where do we find each other to have sex with? But also, what are the apps that are actually really going to get me some attention? And so it's really been some of those really basic conversations where some people just don't even consider that that's where we need to start with the conversation. And then, it gets into more detailed things like, I have chronic pain. How can I even experience any kind of pleasure? And that's real for many, many people. And one of the things that I say to folks is to remind us that all bodies have the possibility to experience pain, and all bodies have the possibility to experience pleasure. And it really is about communication and being clear about what your desires are. Because sometimes, I have chronic pain too, and I don't want to be touched. And sometimes I really do, but only in a particular way. And so being clear about that and talking and sharing it with possible partners is really important. And it's also a really great example of consent and how consent is constantly shifting and changing during this time. So I'm going to pause there because I know that we'll probably have a lot more questions from folks who are in attendance, as well as for Danny and V.
All right, thank you. So V, let's hear from you. I know you've done some considerable education on these topics as well. Do you have anything to add in terms of what's missing from sexual health education when it comes to students with disabilities, or anything else that you feel like could be relevant to where we're starting here?
Yeah, I mean, Bianca did a great job breaking everything down. And my brain was just like having fireworks. So I was like, yes, girl, yes. But like for me, I think just having a good network of people who are supportive of you, of your identities, is so hard. And I think because of that, representation just lacks. And support systems tend to lack because of all the stigma that comes with disabled bodies, the awkwardness of the society has caused on like disabled bodies, and having this internalized antiquated thinking of disabled bodies being ugly or sinful or not worthy of love or pleasure or relationships. So I think I think the main thing is really talking about also establishing community and what community looks like, and how to find also support systems that will actually you know empower you versus continue to oppress you, and then continue to oppress the way we want to explore our sexualities, or we want to express ourselves, period.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Maggie.
So I'm curious, I know Bianca shared that she feels comfortable talking about her personal experience, but I'm going to open this up to all three of the panelists. How has disability impacted your intimate and sexual relationships? So Bianca, if you want to start, and then anyone else can kind of jump in.
Yeah, so I had a very high libido, which means I had a lot of desire for sex and sexual partners. And that when I started to take certain medications, that was impacted. And my desire for sex, my libido really dropped. And it was primarily when I started to take a medication called Effexor for anxiety and depression. And that happened, I had met in person V during that time. And my mom had just died. And so I was grieving. I had also just been diagnosed with a disability that I had inherited from my mom and her compromised immune system. And so I didn't know what to expect. I had never been on medication in that way before. And I also knew that I needed the medication to cope with my grief. And so that was a really big shift for me, because I had never not wanted sex or to experience touch in a particular way. So that was the first thing that I experienced. The second thing that I experienced was my body not being able to move in the same way that I had historically been used to moving when I was having sex with partners. So what does that mean? Well, it looked like my joints hurt a little bit, so I couldn't be on my hands and knees, right? It looked like I couldn't hold certain parts of my body up, so I needed a wedge or like 4 pillows to hold me up in a particular way. Also, pain. So I could be like on my knees for a particular amount of time, but what you can't see about me is that I'm 6 feet tall and I'm fat. So I'm just a huge person in general. And a lot of my partners weren't always the same height or weight as myself. And so having me be positioned in a particular way and having them get into their position to get comfortable, by that point I was like, I need to get in a different position. So it really interrupted the back and forth. And, for me, what helped was laughter, enjoying our companionship, whatever our relationship was as lovers at the time, because I had lovers and not partners. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I was one of those late bloomers. I'll be 43. And I had thought that I would just live a life of being single and having close friendships, and just have lovers come in and out of my life. I really kind of resigned myself to not being in a loving, intimate relationship or relationships as a polyamorous person who is open to various relationships with different people at different times. And during that time, I was diagnosed. I was taking all these medication, and I met my partner, and my partner's 45, and it was just really, it was a shock. I wasn't ready. I totally and I was also losing my libido. And my partner is much shorter than me, although G doesn't like it when I say that, but it's true. Like, G is 5'5". Like, that's a big chunk of difference when it comes to height. And so we just giggled about it. We were like, all right, let's figure out the position where you're not going to be in pain, and I can figure out how to mount you or how to like lift you up or whatever. And that's also been a part of our expansive play, where I now am a wheelchair user from time to time. I also use a cane, and we've been able to incorporate some of those things into our play and our sex play. And we've also been able to expand what it means for us to be intimate and close. So we're really into a lot of massages that really helps both of us and both of our chronic pain. And so it's another thing where when I met G did not identify as someone with a politicized identity of disability. And I think today he still wouldn't identify as disabled necessarily, but he sees how much closer he is to having a disabled body, and what's coming up for him in that work. And it's heavy stuff, because G is also trans, so there's lots of other things that come up for him around his body, and how it's working and moving. And then both of us being perimenopausal, like, that's not fun. And we're both just really excited for when we're not going to bleed anymore. So that's another thing that's come up for our lives. And certain things that really saved our sex life as it shifted, was one, talking to my medical providers about decreasing my dosage for my mental health medication, and also getting a shower chair that can hold 500 pounds, because now G and I can both sit on that shower chair, and we could, shower each other, we can bathe, we can do whatever, and not be worried that our weight won't be held together. And so this has been just a different, more expansive way of considering how we're connecting and communicating. And another thing that's really helped us is that we live in a home, it's with 5 rooms. So we have 2 other roommates, and we both have our own rooms. So I can say to G, I don't want to see you right now, or I need to be alone, and he can go to his own room, and he could do the same thing. So I feel like that's really helped us during the pandemic to not, get, to miss each other from time to time, but also being thankful that we like each other as well. So there's lots of things that have really been difficult, but also we found some solutions that really help us. I've been able to find toys that have longer arms. So since I have a long body and a long torso, there's a longer way to go to reach my middle parts and my genitals or other parts of my body. And so being really clear about what sensations I want and therefore what kind of support I need has also been really, really helpful with our sex life at this time. There's a question, can you define polyamorous and other relationship types? So I'll define polyamorous, and I'll invite V and Danny or Danielle, sorry, to offer an expansive or expand on the definitions. So for me, polyamory is about the reality that I am not seeking to be just with one person for the rest of my life and only one person. I'm open to having multiple different relationships. And so that can look like having lovers, that can look like having people that I date, that can look like having people who want to just hold my hand, or people who really want to build a home with me and want their own room in our house and who we come home to together. And that for me is what polyamory is about. And G very much has a similar perspective. And we're both in agreement that we are each other's core partner, which means that we prioritize that relationship in a particular way because it's our choice to do that with each other, that we're not forcing each other to choose each other, that there isn't a hierarchy, that if G finds someone, if I find someone and we want to build a relationship with that individual, we get to determine what that looks like for us, and we also get to talk about how our relationship is going to shift and change. Other words that people use to describe polyamory are relationship anarchy, where there's this challenge to monogamy, where people stay with one person for the rest of their life and only one person. And I believe that not one person can be all of the things to me, and that I can't be someone's only person. I'm just one person. I have my own flaws and limitations, and that it's only fair that we all get to experience the relationships that we want whenever we want them. So that's how I define polyamory, and I welcome Danielle and V to share and expand on those.
I think I'll just add quickly to this conversation of polyamory. I identify as practicing ethical non-monogamy, which I really think is like an umbrella term. I think a lot of things, and I'd love to hear how other folks feel about this, but this is my understanding of it, is it's an umbrella term that a lot of other things fall under. I have a core partner. We've been married for 5 years, together for 7, and we have been non-monogamous the whole time. And I really want to emphasize the ethical aspect of it to me, because I think it's very intentional we need to be abundantly clear that non-monogamy is different from like cheating or lying to your partner. There's so much transparency, so much communication, and everyone involved. Like my partner right now has a partner, and I had partners, but I'm having a really hard time dating during the pandemic, as a lot of us are. But everyone that it's involved knows everything that's happening and all the dynamics of it, and everyone is consenting to it, and everyone is part of the decision-making process of it. And I think it's a really important challenge to monogamy. I grew up on compulsory monogamy values and had to unlearn a lot of toxic and just not good relationship dynamics. And I was lucky to be able to unlearn a lot of that and continue to unlearn that through practicing ethical non-monogamy.
Okay, V, anything you want to share about
I
relationships?
have nothing to add. I want to keep the conversation going because I think there is a lot of experience and knowledge, and I think a lot of people have questions as well. So let's keep it rolling.
Okay. Okay, so our next question is for anyone. What does coming out as disabled entail, especially with online dating? Can anyone share a story of how they've come out to a potential date or a lover or a potential partner?
I know for me, when I was on dating sites earlier on, um, you know, early 20s, I had a lot of shame with identifying with my disability and putting that on my profiles, because I always felt like oh, well, they should get to know me first before they can determine whether or not they want to have anything with me. And um, with time, I started to really unpack that because I was just like, well, I really have to acknowledge that I am also causing harm to myself by not acknowledging on the forefront that I'm disabled, because that is a salient identity for me. And I think it's really important to um, have that journey of self love and finding out, um, you know, where your values first and foremost come from, and being able to identify what feels good for you or what feels healthier for you or what will get you to a place that you're gonna ultimately be happy. And for me, not acknowledging my disability early on was causing me so much unhappiness. But I can't speak to everyone. You know, everyone has their own story, their own reason why they may or may not disclose on dating sites. Um, I do know that once I was more comfortable with my disability and expressed being a wheelchair user, um, cane user, um, etc., I have the privilege of passing as a really attractive person that's, um, quote unquote, attractive in beauty standards. And so one of the challenging things that I had was people still not wanting to acknowledge my disability because they just wanted to uh, acknowledge how pretty I was versus everything else that it came with, who I am as a person and what my disability um, also impacts in terms of dynamics with like sex and um, different things of that nature. Um, but for me, again, I can't really say why someone should or shouldn't express their disability on profiles. I think we need to also consider safety, um, the importance of being able to uh, also have like friends who can be your people to help you out of situations if you're on a date and you don't want to be there, that sort of thing. So now I feel like I'm rambling, but I will let other people speak in. But for me, I am the type of person where I'm just like, I'm disabled and I'm sexy as fuck. And, um, even though I have that privilege of being quote unquote pretty, I think having confidence, period, is like super attractive to a lot of people. And a lot of times it's just your attitude and it's just making sure that the right people, you'll attract the right people. People who are meant to be your lover, your partner, your friend, etc., whatever. They'll honor who you are as a person, regardless of um, what your identities are or what your body looks like. And I'll leave it at that.
I just want to share a comment we got from Sarge. Sexy knows sexy. So yes, I love that. Bianca, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, let's see, coming out as disabled. So like I said, I was really heavily grieving. And if anybody's lost a parent, you know what that feels like and how disorienting it is. And I think for me, I just was saying things, I was in a daze and I was just telling people how it really was. And so for me, I was just like, and I'm disabled and I take medication and this is, what it's like. And I just really was very matter of fact about it. And, you know, and I was also in a space where I was like, so if you don't like it, you need to leave now because you're not going to waste my time kind of thing. So I really, I don't know how it would have been if I wasn't grieving. And today, you know, that's what I say to people now, where people, you know, if I'll talk to them through an app or text them to get to know them and they want to meet, I'll say, oh, I'm not leaving my house. I'm immunocompromised and you're trying to kill me. Like, you know, and I'm, you know, no, thank you. Right? Like, I want to get to know you a little bit better before we make this decision, because I don't know if you're worth it yet to meet during a pandemic. And if you're someone that I even want to be 6 feet away from. So I've really used this pandemic time to explore and ask people like the really important questions to me about their principles and values, to really assess early on, is this someone that I want to spend my time getting to know? And if I do, is it in a way where they might be a romantic, intimate partner? Will they just be a sexual partner? Will they just be someone to do activities with? I mean, these are some of the things that I'm assessing right now in dating. And you know, coming out as disabled is just one of the ways that I've had to come out. You know, I think coming out as queer, coming out as being open to dating people of various genders, not just within a binary. So I'm open to dating women and men and trans people and non-binary people and intersex people. That's also something I come out about. You know, I come out as someone who has had sexually transmitted infections before, someone who has had cervical cancer, you know, so there's other things that I come out about that are sometimes a little bit harder than saying, oh, I have a compromised immune system. So people usually have a lot more questions about like, what do you mean you had cancer caused by a virus that you get sexually? You know, like that kind of fear is also what came up. And, you know, that happened before I identified politically as disabled. I had survived cervical cancer diagnosis. And, you know, after that, when I had, you know, the okay to continue relationships, I had several people who were like, nope, I don't want to be around someone who has had the HPV virus because that can be transmitted to me. And it was really hard and enraging. And, you know, it was from people who we think are like so radical and so brilliant and yet have these narrow ideas about surviving cancer and, you know, HPV. And so there's more things that come out about, I think, besides my disability. And also that's because I now claim disability as a huge part of my identity and I can't leave it out. And I think that's been one of the ways that I've been able to show up fully and also weed out the nonsense. And, you know, some of the apps that I really like to use, I'll put in the chat because, and I'll also say it out loud because that was a question, like, are there any dating apps for people who are disabled? And so one that I really like first started out as, and is primarily a dating app for people who are open to polyamorous or open or ethical non-monogamy relationships. And it's called #open. And I just put the link in the chat box. But what I also really like about #open is that they use hashtags for people to find each other. So I can put #chronic pain using camel case. If you don't know what camel case is, capitalizing the first letters of each word in a hashtag so that people's readers can translate them versus them just being read as one full word. So you saying chronic pain, compromised immune system, you know, or pandemic fuck buddy, whatever it is, right? Like people can use hashtags to find each other. You know, fat positive, things like that have really been helpful for me. And I think that has really also shifted the way that I interact with people. So for me, #open has been really, really amazing for me to build those relationships. And also when I see people who have their own, you know, hashtags like I don't know, what's the thing that turns me off? Like milk fetish. I'm not into milk. I don't like milk. I like almond milk. You know, like, so these are just examples of like, I don't need to mess with that person. That person wants to do something with milk in my body. I'm not here for it. We're not going to be a good match. You know, so it's really also helped me decide who I want to spend more time talking to. And they also have a really radical approach to community guidelines and engagement. And they support people notifying them anonymously if someone is being abusive on the app. And they've worked with many consultants in the sexuality and consent field to help build that protocol for reporting. So I really appreciate that as an approach. Other types of apps that I know exist for people is like Glimmer, where it was created by a person who had a sibling who was disabled. I think the sibling had a cognitive disability. And there's also an app called Lemonade, which I think is, again, a cross disability app. And I think Lemonade is spelled with a Y somewhere in there. And there's another app, I'll try to look it up and Google it for y'all, that's more for people who have like irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease or celiac disease, and who are like, I need people who understand that I have a shitty experience, literally and figuratively. So and it's not gonna be an issue when I'm like, hey, I want some anal sex, and I'm gonna insert, will you help me insert this enema so that we can have some anal, like it's not a thing, right? So I think that's a really useful one. So I'll look that up and put it in the chat box when I find it.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those great resources, and also both of you for sharing just sort of your personal experience with this too. And I think maybe kind of shameless plug, on December 9th, we also have a talk by Dr. Kate Caldwell, who researched the similarities between coming out as bisexual and coming out as disabled. And I think that you both brought up really good points of like, there are so many things potentially we have to come out about. And so like, how do we choose to prioritize what those things are, right? Based on maybe who we're looking for, or the kinds of relationships we're looking to have. And something you both brought up in various ways was issues around like safety and acknowledging sort of how we can stay safe in the relationships that we're looking for, how we can create situations where we are cared for. And also you talked about like privacy and, the importance of it, the lack thereof. So I want to look to Danny first and then kind of open it up for this next question. Like so we've talked a little bit about boundaries, about consent and why they're important in relationships. And now we're in this sort of forced isolation, this forced privacy that we haven't had before. And I know that it has put a lot of pressure on survivors of domestic violence, especially, in addition to maybe folks who are living at home with disabilities. So Danielle, I'm sorry, can you talk a little bit more about sort of how the pandemic has affected survivors and really just like why privacy is a thing that we need for a healthy relationship? And then maybe we can open it up to V and Bianca to talk about that in terms of their experiences too.
Yeah, so working at the network advocating against domestic violence, our hotline, for example, has seen a 33% increase, and this was during the peak earlier this year. So now that we're re-peaking with the pandemic, I'm sure it's going to be higher again. But a 33% increase in phone volume, because so much of us are stuck at home. And I think safety is something that a lot of us take for granted. It's not something you take for granted when you are a survivor of domestic violence, whatever that domestic violence is. And it's not something you take for granted when you are a domestic violence advocate, because we have to do a lot of safety planning. And I even just did a training on it today, and I think about my own home, because I'm in a relationship that is safe and nurturing and healing for me. My home feels safe for me. It's a place that despite a lot of the challenges of the pandemic, I am comfortable in my home. I am not at risk of being harmed in my home. And that is something that a lot of people have access to. And so a lot of folks that are experiencing domestic violence, and I just want to quickly define DV. we often talk about domestic violence as intimate partner violence, like something that's happening between two partners. I think traditionally through second wave feminism, it was something that a man, like a husband, does to a wife. Now we are much more expansive when we think about DV, but it also includes like something that caregivers could, like a person with disability could be experiencing with their caregiver. Or someone, there's like abuse later in life, or something that children experience from their parents, or children are perpetuating on their parents or other family members. So we have to be very inclusive when we're talking about domestic violence. And in fact, the number, like the most common form of DV is actually sibling abuse, but it's just not something that we think about because that is so normalized in sitcoms and media and stuff like that. All of that is to say, when you think about all these people that can be and are victims and survivors of domestic violence, think about the ways that the pandemic has made it even harder for folks to get out of relationships if that's something that they want, or just to be able to find some harm reduction, some risk reduction, and find avenues of safety. It's really, really difficult right now. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I just, like, my heart goes out to a lot of folks because we're seeing firsthand that a lot of people don't have other options right now. I think being stuck at home, coupled with the economic crisis that we're having, a lot of people, not having access to work, it's just a really hard time for folks.
And to follow that up, like, do you want to add anything, Bea or Bianca, in terms of like, how do you find privacy, and especially thinking about if you don't have a super supportive family or roommates or whomever you're sharing your space with, or if you're reliant on those caregivers, if you're reliant on PAs, so on and so forth.
Yeah, one of my favorite principles of a disability justice framework is interdependence. And that basically is the reality that we can't do this alone. We need each other to survive and get through everything. And we're not going to leave each other behind when we need help or when we're trying to move forward. And that interdependence and mutual aid is really what has changed my life during the pandemic, and really worked to ensure that I stay alive during a pandemic. And what that looks like for me here in the Bay Area was when California is very close to Asia in comparison to like Chicago. And we heard the stories like end of January, early February. And very early on, I remember looking at my partner and thinking, we got to get some gloves and some masks. We all know what's going to happen. We might need to get some more Clorox wipes. And it was queer and disabled people of color who really created the mutual aid, where we would have people drop off, like other disabled people doing cross disability movement work would drop off, hand sanitizer, would drop off some masks, N95 masks. And, this was work that they had been doing here. There's a wildfire season in California, for those of you who may or may not know. And so masks were also a really big thing, as well as, hubs where people could have generators, because we would have like rolling blackouts because of our aging electrical grid, and people would lose. We lost 2 disabled people last year because of those blackouts, who were dependent on electricity to survive. And so it was disabled people who mobilized collectively to do this work. And so when I think about how that shows up, how violence, how privacy shows up, I think it's a reminder that we get to experience privacy. And sometimes as disabled people, even though I've only claimed my disability for about 5 years, even then, people, like doctors, would just touch me without telling me why. They would touch me without notifying me that they were going to do it. They would do something without telling me what was happening, and I really wasn't used to people doing that to me. And so it really shifted my relationship with medical providers. And I know for a fact that that is something that's happened to people with disabilities who were born with them or who had them as children, like constantly being touched, not being consent not being offered or requested or given. And also, medical providers just parading you around in a way that really, if we don't like it, we look ungrateful for their attention, right? So that was another thing that I haven't necessarily experienced, but I totally have had so many friends in my life who were like, it was shitty, Bianca. I know what you mean when you say that was your experience. And so, it's been a challenge. And so when I think about privacy a lot, what I think about is what makes me feel like I have space to explore and not have to talk to people about it, not have to, worry about who might listen. So I've really had to define privacy for myself very similarly to how I realized when I was working with young people, they were defining things like abstinence very differently than the way I was. I would have young people be like, oh, miss, I'm abstinent. I only have anal sex. And I was like, wow, my definition of abstinence totally doesn't include anal sex or oral sex or vaginal sex. So talk to me about how you're defining abstinence, and that was when I realized we're defining things differently. And so I had to redefine privacy for myself. I also had to redefine pleasure for myself. And also safety became a new thing that I had to define. And that's constantly evolving for me now during this pandemic, where I realized that, living with two other people outside of my partner, halfway through the pandemic in the summer, we had people who were like, I'm tired of wearing a mask when I leave the house. And that immediately put me in danger of death, and so if I'm not safe in my own home, where is there safety for me? And it was really hard to look for roommates during a pandemic. It was really hard to find other people who would abide by our very strict protocol of cleanliness and masking and what we went through with 4 roommates during the pandemic so far. And our current 2 roommates are disabled family members. And it's been amazing. So that's another reminder of interdependence. I'm not worrying about my roommates coming home from running around unmasked, playing at the lake or whatever, hanging out and going to restaurants, and then coming back and bringing COVID in the house. So that's been fluctuating for me. And so as we see this second surge in the pandemic, I've really had to think about, what does safety mean for me now? What will safety mean for me in the future? Part of my compromised immune system is that I'm also more sensitive to contracting other bacterial infections. And, I went to the dentist last month to get some dental work, and I was scared the entire time, because it's the dentist and they're in your face, in your mouth. And, 2 days later, I came down with a fever. And so these are the things that I'm just like, oh my gosh, everybody was masked, everybody washed their hands. They were super, super following a really rigid protocol. And I still was exposed to, bacteria. And then same thing with yeast infections. We're going to change, I think, ASL interpreters. Yeah. So the same thing with yeast infections, I now have a yeast infection and how that's impacting my sex life with my partner, where we can say, hey, do we want to use a dental dam or some saran wrap to protect me from coming into contact with your bacterial infection, but we still want to engage with each other's genitals in a particular way. And so that's been hard because, sometimes there's an odor and that's not fun. And, there's just things about sex that, it's supposed to be messy and sticky and, wet and whatever. But sometimes you don't want that all at the same time. And that's okay too. So there's been a shift in that for me, for sure.
Okay, thanks. So Danielle and V, could either or both of you talk a little bit more about boundaries and consent? I feel like we've touched on both of these topics, but how do you see boundaries and consent? What are they? Why are they important for a healthy relationship? And how do we go about creating them?
So I think of boundaries as something that helps you define what you're comfortable with, and how you'd like to be treated by others. And, when we talk about boundaries and consent, I think we're often thinking about sexual relationships, but we are exerting our boundaries and we're engaging in consensual activity in any relationship. Like I have boundaries with my parents, I have boundaries with my pets, my partners, my friends, work. And the same thing with consent. When I'm doing things or not doing things with friends or family or whoever, colleagues, I'm engaging in consent. And so when I think about boundaries, I think that we talk about it in relationship to other people, but it's really about your relationship with yourself and being able to honor your own needs, your own goals and feelings and values. And I think the other thing I would say about boundaries is that, like, they can be emotional, digital, physical. So saying like, I'm cool with following each other on social media, but not doing this, or I want to hold hands, but not in front of these people. There's so many different ways that boundaries can manifest. And then when I think about consent, I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what consent is. I think Planned Parenthood, I think Planned Parenthood was the first one that had this. Correct me if I'm wrong. The like fries, like freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. I've always liked that kind of definition of consent, but I think consent is something that is unambiguous, willing participation or cooperation in some sort of act or behavior or attitude that is like understood to be consistent with your exercise of free will. And so consent has to be very clear, coherent. You know, what was it? People would say yes is yes. And I like that. Yes means yes, no means no. But if I don't say no, or if there's the absence of no, that doesn't mean yes. So understanding that consent has to be very communicative. It has to be something that you do willingly and that it's ongoing. Bringing this back to my sex work, just because I have sex with a client at one point doesn't mean that a person has the right to have sex with me at 7 p.m. that night, or even that client. I talk about that with them. And that's something that folks have a really hard time understanding sometimes, is that we have to negotiate. We have to boundary negotiate and engage in a conversation of consent each time we're going to have sex, if that's a possibility. And I also really extend that into my intimate relationships. But I think a lot of sex work has taught me how to have healthier sexual and intimate relationships. So that's what I would say boundaries and consent are. Would you add anything, V, to that?
No, you definitely gave a great explanation. I the the main thing that was popping in my head when everything was happening, both of you um, sharing, is even though I'm a therapist, I am still trying to figure out what healthy boundaries are, because I'm still undoing all these ableist, um, you know, uh, structures that I've grown up with. Um, I'm lucky enough that um, working for the largest LGBTQ Midwest health center has allowed me to really find people who can help me challenge that and unpack that for myself, and not always have to seem like I have to give in to what is expected for disabled folks. Like, you're expected to always be readily uh, available to be touched, or even uh, with our mobility aids, like people just putting their hands on our wheelchairs, or assuming that they can put their feet up on our mobility aids, or like assuming that they can like play around with our cane. It's something that's we constantly, as disabled people, I feel, especially who for me, who have gone grown up in a very toxic uh family dynamic and toxic medicalized relationship with my body. I'm still learning. And I just wanted to share that because um, I think it's still important to acknowledge that even though um, we are human and we understand like what's healthy, what's not healthy, what we wish we could get to, a lot of the times it has to be trial and error. And a lot of times it also has to do with finding the right people who will help you feel confident in knowing that your boundaries are to be respected. Um, and, having knowledge around what feels good to you, what doesn't feel good to you. And a lot of times I think, Danielle, you also talked a little bit about this with your experience as a sex worker. you know Different experiences will teach us what feels good and what doesn't feel good. um and we still have to unpack different ableist things, like within the medical system, of like, no, I just don't want to be paraded around. No, I don't want to be like an example for students. No, I don't want to be just thrown into medication world and not really get dig deeper of what's happening. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I'm going everywhere in my head. But I just wanted to also acknowledge my experience as a disabled person, and that I'm still learning, even though like I understand this shit. Like I do this shit for like a living, and yeah.
Thank you, V, again, for being so honest in this moment and sharing your experience. I'm learning a lot from that. So thank you. I wanted, just as we're kind of getting towards the end of our time together, I saw one question that came through in the chat that I definitely want to spend some time on. I'm looking to Danielle. The question was around porn and sort of what do we see its use or its non-usefulness. And I know that a disability activist that I follow, Andrew Gerza, has talked a lot about his relationships with sex workers as part of his understanding his sexuality with the disabled body. So I'm curious, given your experience, can you talk a little bit about those two things? So like the porn thing, and then how do you see sex work intersecting with disability?
Awesome. And I want to just read the question one more time. Is that okay? It says, what are your thoughts or opinions on porn? Good, bad, useful? Is there porn for folks with disabilities? Okay, so first, porn. I mean, I love porn. I love being in porn. I love watching porn. I think porn is art. I think it can be very educational. What I don't like is a lot of mainstream porn. So I'm thinking off the top of my head, Pornhub, and at Swap, we're doing a lot of work with them because I think of porn, for better or for worse, as a lot of young people's like first engagement with sexual health and sex ed, and that's good and bad. I think some of the bad is that a lot of schools don't have comprehensive, non-abstinence only sexual health education, and then coupled with all of the systemic oppression in our society, a lot of that comes out in mainstream porn. So a lot of ableism, a lot of racism, a lot of misogyny and trans misogyny comes out in the porn, that if you're not being intentional about the porn that you're looking for, the porn that's free and often stolen from clip artists. And so I even think about something like if you go to Pornhub and you look at all of the categories are defined by the folks that are consumers as well as the folks that are making money off of our videos. And we are talking to Pornhub about radically revolutionizing how we categorize porn, and what does it mean if we as the clip artists, as the models, are able to title our porn ourselves. I will use an example of myself and then of a friend with disability. I know that when I have made porn, I've had to use language that I don't like, such as ebony and Nubian, which are not words I use to describe myself as an African or as a Black femme, but are words I know that folks are going to be able to find my videos. Similarly, I have a friend with a disability that does porn. And I just want to say, and I'm not speaking on behalf of this person, but some of the things that they've shared at workshops I've attended is a lot of the accessibility that comes with being able to, like, if you're engaging in sex work, the world and niche of porn. I think, one, it's really deeply important for us to be able to see so many different types of bodies in videos and so many different types of bodies experiencing pleasure. I think that, and I'm going to go on a little tangent for a second, as a previous sex ed teacher, um, sex ed didn't feel accessible or relatable to LGBTQ folks. And then I found out later that it didn't feel relatable to the students I had with disabilities, because our sex ed was just so heteronormative, so ableist, and so whitewashed and so Western. And so to be able to see folks with so many different types of body being able to experience pleasure and say, actually, like, kind of like coming and confronting us to be like, you are not used to this imagery, but you need to get used to this because our bodies exist, our bodies are beautiful, and our pleasure is beautiful, is something that I learned from the folks in the communities of people with disabilities. And I just wanted to kind of mention something I put in the chat when Bianca was talking, the 10 principles of disability justice. I am not a person with disability that I know of. I do, you put in the chat, the gutsy dating, and I was just like, oh, but I have Crohn's disease. Oh my God. I'm like learning about myself in this moment. And I just want to say, as a person that is just as an ally, we think of disability. I'm talking externally. This is something that I felt before. I thought of disability as something that was like something that couldn't happen to my body, or something that wasn't like transient. And then as I've gotten to learn more, it's like you can become a person with disability at some point in your lifetime. And I think especially Carrie Kaufmann, who was going to be here tonight, said to me once, this is something that the likelihood of it increases as you get older, and yet we don't run our world as if that reality is truth. And so I say that to say that the 10 principles of disability justice has actually taught me what organizing and what community building and what a radical acceptance of all bodies looks like, because these principles are written by folks with disability, but it applies to all communities in this like anti-capitalist kind of perspective and lens. And so I just want to personally say that even though I'm a panelist here, I'm learning so much from you and Bianca and V, and I hope that other folks are too. But going back to porn is wonderful. Pay your porn stars for their stuff, and you can find the ethical, feminist, anti-capitalist porn that uses all bodies as intersectional, and is not rooted in the oppressive kind of identities that we see.
Yeah, and I also want to just add to what Danielle's sharing and just share two things that I really appreciate around porn. Here in the Bay Area, we have the Crash Pad series, which is Black queer women run. And you have a variety of different people with disabilities who are also performers. You have different bodies, different genders, different sexual attractions and orientations, different scenarios. So Crash Pad is really great. And I also just want to plug people's OnlyFans. Like, go make an OnlyFans page. If you have $5 a month, or if you have $15 a month, you can just pay $5 for 3 different people's monthly whatever. And look, CV got Danielle got one up in there, Miss V Chicago, and you can get whatever those people are creating, whether they be images or videos. Sometimes individuals will take requests and do specialty things for a variety of different budgets. And so for me, this is part of ethical consumption of pornography, is by paying the individuals who are creating it directly and paying them the rate that they have decided on their own to pay. And that I think is really, really important for us to acknowledge when it comes to humanizing sex workers, and also making more common the reality that sex workers are care workers. They're healers. They help us in a variety of different ways. And so if you're looking for someone who has a particular disability, if you're looking for someone who will do a particular kind of action, you can find that on the OnlyFans page.
Thank you so much. And for the sake of time, I think we need to sort of pivot to our last question, which is heartbreaking. But so without realizing it, we sort of accidentally scheduled this talk on International Day for People with Disabilities, which is a day to promote the rights and well-beings of people with disabilities. And it really made me think about sort of the difference between rights and justice. And this comes from a training that was shared with me on mutual aid and abolition work. Shout out to Emma, who's here, and the rest of the educators with the Defund CPD campaign for doing this amazing workshop. But basically, they were talking about how people with disabilities have the right to relationships without harm, as we all do. However, disability justice is one of the ways we collectively work to create community in liberation that can ensure those rights are actually being met. And so these things have to be sort of happening in tandem, right? So with this in mind, I wanted to close by asking each of you, what are your visions, hopes, dreams for the future of disability justice and this community that we are building in liberation?
I'm happy to go first. You know, for me, it's really about dreaming of a world where everyone's needs are met. And it really is that simple, y'all. Like, those are what my dreams are. How radical would this life be if all of our needs were met when we need them? So yeah, that's my simple dream for disability justice.
Mine is similar. I am a communist and I feel that way, and also a future without prisons and police.
My hope is to have an environment that has more universal design, because I think our environments also uh, help people internalize uh, more ableist thinking. And if we were to just simply have an environment that was more universal or inviting for folks of different abilities to be part of community, period, part of society, period, um, we will be better as a whole society. Like Danielle mentioned earlier, and Carrie and I have talked about this specifically too, but acknowledging that our bodies, you know, people age and disability happens at many different points. Like, it doesn't make sense that this society has not caught up to the idea that universal design benefits everyone. It benefits people's access. It lessens the need for people to, I don't know, have to go to a mental health provider to undo all this trauma, because like we have so many different things that impact us and tell us that we're not good enough, that tell us that we're not worthy of love. Now I just feel like I'm going to go into an emotional moment, so I'm going to stop myself. But yeah, universal design. I will always plug that.
All right. Well, as we're coming to a close, I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. This is such a dream come true for me personally, and wanting to share this really important information with all of our communities. And just to do a shameless plug, we do have several upcoming events, which you can see on my screen. So please feel free to register for those, and leave some love and encouragement in the chat for all of our panelists. And thank you all for your thoughtful questions, both before today and during the session. It's been really empowering and encouraging, and this just such a powerful space. So thank you all. And we will see you at our next event next week, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say to you three, you guys were awesome.
There we go.
you, Molly. Thank you so much.
Molly.
Have a great weekend.
You
We're on
too.
Friday.
And have a good holiday.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Everyone, thank you so
Bye,
much.
Tara.